Hey, John, welcome. Thanks for joining me today.
My pleasure.
So where do we find you today?
Currently in Panama, enjoying the wonderful weather. Um,
Okay.
yeah, no, just came back from the beach, right? World-class beaches here on both sides of the country. I'm actually planning on just relaxing a little bit because I'm going to be taking a trip to England next week. I'm going to be presenting on behalf of Province Brands. I'm chairman of the company, and I'm assisting the president to present before a group of family offices in London on the 11th and 12th.
Excellent, excellent. You know, we've given folks a background, a bit of your background, and it all comes down to what are you involved with right now? And we know it's the cannabis industry. Tell us about your current focus in cannabis.
Okay, my current focus, James, in cannabis is I'm involved with two licensed producers in Colombia. What does that mean? Green Mile, which is the company currently right now that's most advanced, we hold licenses in various aspects of cultivation. Non-psychoactive, which is defined as less than 0.3% THC in plants. Psychoactive, which is clearly more than 0.3%. We have what's called transformation, meaning we can create derivatives like oils, for example. We also have seed licenses, which permits us to do research, so we can take seeds and do cultivation and do genetic testing and come up with our own strains. That's a research license. Actually, that's one that was rather difficult to obtain. And we also have registered seed strains, meaning our own proprietary strains that we've registered with the government. This is Green Mile. We have 7 strains, and plus we have over 50 in our genetic vault. And our objective with Green Mile is to produce the best genetics possible for Colombia to sell to other companies. In addition, we're going to be providing product as well for export as those markets evolve. But our focus right now is to be a producer of genetics for Colombia, and then eventually for the rest of South America. And why Colombia? Well, our strains are adapted to Colombia. So one of the common mistakes that are made is people will buy seeds from other countries, like say Canada. They may be really good strains, but when you take those seeds, they're living organisms. You take those seeds, you plant them, and what expresses itself can be a lot different than what expresses itself in Canada for various reasons. The environment is totally different, whether it's the soil, lighting conditions, water, and so forth, right? You might get a different type of plant. Further, a lot of the plants that come from North America are not adapted to deal with the pathogens that you experience in Colombia and the insects and certain things. So if you don't have the right genetics, doesn't matter what you bring in, you're not going to get the results you expect. Finally, this is an industry that is still rather inconsistent in its output of products. There is a certain passion company from Holland, right, where we purchased Durban poison seeds, 6 seeds, and we planted the seeds, and we got 3 different varietals of plants. I mean, you look at them, one is like indica dominant, which is broadleaf. One of them is like sativa dominant, narrowleaf, and the other one's kind of in the middle. So if you're in a commercial operation and you want to plant a particular strain because you want to harvest a certain amount of THC or certain cannabinoids, right? You want to have consistency in your plants. It's kind of like you buy corn seeds, right? And you end up with millet or oat, doesn't really work. Right? Maybe it's not the best analogy, but I think it conveys, especially on a commercial operation. So consistency is really important. So our focus with our company will be to provide other companies with genetics so that they'll know exactly what they're getting. We'll be selling clones, and we're probably going to do tissue culturing as well. So.
And is your market focus all of South America?
Ultimately, yes.
Okay.
Currently, Colombia, because that's more than enough to do in Colombia. But I mean, ultimately, we saw no reason why we can't take our genetics and market it to other parts of South America as well.
Are there similar models in North America, in the U.S. and Canada?
That's evolving. It's definitely coming out. But the real issue is that there still isn't like an international legal seed trade as yet, right? That still hasn't been determined. So technically, I mean, depending on who you believe, even though seeds have no psychoactives in them, you got to remember, these are the seeds. You have no psychoactives in them. There's still some restrictions on how they can be brought into other countries, right? I mean, that's just part of any any country that wants to make sure that their biodiversity is not affected by plants imported from other countries that could change the ecosystem. I mean, we all know that when we fill out a customs form and ask us, are you carrying any seeds? I mean, that's an example of how those things are regulated, right? So right now it's in its nascent stages, and it's an interesting opportunity. I mean, if you like cultivation, if you like growing plants, if you like genetics, if you like experimenting, this is a great sector to be in. And we believe eventually some of these proprietary strains that we're creating, we'll be able to mark them with DNA, and we'll be able to patent them. So, and that is, by the way, where I see a lot of this going. Now, there'll be a lot of people be upset to hear that, right? You know, they'll think of, you know, Monsanto, for example, with the Terminator seeds and that sort of thing. And, you know, if something is, you know, something could be immune to glyphosate, you know, so you could see a scenario where you have a bunch of cannabis plants. Monsanto has their Terminator plant, so to speak. You spray it with glyphosate and everything but their plant dies. I mean, I don't like that scenario, but I can see stuff like that happening. But that's where I see proprietary strains. Now, there will always be room for craft growers. There'll always be room for people that want to do their own auto cultivation, what they call self-cultivation, right? Meaning that they want to grow their own strains. But on a commercial basis, I see that coming out, right? I think that's going to be a major source of competitive advantage. There'll be genetic drift, and there'll be a lot of people who vehemently disagree with me, right? And you know, markets are not necessarily perfect. You know, a lot of it is based on belief, right? And we think that if consumers say, oh, I want to know that's a Durban poison strain, I'm using that as an example, right? Or like Punto Rojo in California and from Colombia, or like, you know, Panama Gold, you know, the ones that used to be here. Those are good strains, but they're also very different too, right? And you want to have consistency. What does that mean? You know, if you have it more than 4 or 5 generations and the plant is still the same, then you have what's called stabilized. And that's important, right? For people that, for companies that want predictability, especially pharmaceutical entities, right? Pharmaceutical entities do not want to take any risk on genetic deviation. So that's why we also want to do tissue culturing, because that, even more than on the cloning side, will ensure that the product will be consistent. Clones are the same. Sorry, go ahead.
Carry on.
No, I was just going to say, clones, I mean, in theory, will always stay the same, and they will. But there will be a little bit of change. With tissue culture, we can really control not only the expression of the plant, but also that there won't be any pathogens that come from the clone. Because let's say the clone is infected with something, you put it in a room with clean plants, you can ruin them all. So that's one of the reasons why tissue culture is popular.
Wow.
Tissue culture means nothing more than taking a part of a plant, right? Some of the cells, and putting it in a petri dish and growing it out till it becomes a sprout that you can then plant. And obviously I'm oversimplifying, but that's essentially it.
No, I appreciate the oversimplification. So I want to step back for a sec here and ask, how does a guy who has been very successful in the world of tech and has had multiple businesses find his way into this particular sector of the world?
Well, I've been involved in 3 different major exits, actually more like 5, but 3 that what I consider my most important exits. First company was Internet Direct. We merged with Teleglobe in 1999, created an entity that was valued then at $560 million. Then we had a company called Two Cows, which is still around. We sold in April 1999 to Steinmetz Group for $45 million. These are US dollars, right? That company, by the way, has a market cap of over $800 million last time I checked. So we're not exactly geniuses, are we? I don't know that one company. I'd have an extra 0 after my name, but oh well, you know. And then we had a company called Hostopia, which we took public on the Toronto Stock Exchange in November 2006 under symbol H. We raised 29.2 plus the green shoe, and we were on our way to do a NASDAQ listing for 40 to 60 million. And a company called Deluxe Communications loved their business model and paid us a 56% premium over the stock price. So we sold for cash, and I figured, you know what, I had enough, right? I had more than enough money in my jeans to keep me happy for the rest of my life. So I decided to move down to Panama, enjoy the beautiful weather, you know, the lower cost of living, favorable tax regime, the nice beaches, and frankly, the women too. I don't know if I'm supposed to say that, right? But
hey, John, you can say whatever you want. I can edit anything, but no, we're not going to.
No, it's okay. I have biases, right? You know, what can I say? Out of one marriage, was single for a few years, so I thought, oh, this would be great. I love Latin women, so you know, there it is. And anyways, I met my wife, medical doctor. It was a rather interesting circumstance. The first year I was in Panama, I didn't wear my sunscreen. I would just walk around the beach all the time. So I ended up getting a little growth on my face. And one of my friends who's an MD said, "Oh no, John, that doesn't look good. I want to recommend you to an aesthetic medicine specialist who can deal with this stuff." And it happened to be my wife, right? To be, which question is, how did that happen? Well, I met her. She looked at me. She checked it out and said, "Oh yeah, we definitely have to do something with that." And then I started talking with her. We got along great. And I said, "You know, I'd really love to ask you out." And she says, "I can't do that, you know, because it's against my medical ethics and, you know, patient and, you know, doctor-patient relationships." And I said, "No problem. You're fired. Get me the fuck." And the rest is history, right? So
I have to tell you, I did that with my eye doctor, and she said the exact same thing. But I was not as smart as you. I did not fire her.
yeah, maybe it was a little crazy, but oh well. She enjoyed the boldness. So we worked together very happily, and my wife started studying cannabinoids about 4 years ago, right? She started really getting into it, and I asked her why, and she said, "Well, I really love the anti-aging properties of CBD, but there's nothing I can do about that, right?" And I said, "What do you mean?" "Well, it's not legal." And I said, "But why? What's so interesting about CBD?" She says, "Well, it has about 30 times the anti-aging properties, or we'll call it antioxidant, the ability to reduce inflammation by 30x times that of, say, vitamin C." And that's when the light bulb went on for me, because I started realizing that, you know, cannabis isn't just something you smoke to get high. And when my friends in Canada used to talk about consuming the medicine, my Rasta friends, I used to think, "Oh, well, that's just a euphemism for they wanted to get high." But now I realize that, in fact, that's exactly what they meant. And it is medication. So I started looking into the properties, and I started investing in the cannabis sector back in 2015, 2016. I was sticking my toe in the water in Canada. And, you know, I was well rewarded by that, right? And by 2016, when in Colombia, they decided to allow cannabis to be cultivated for medical purposes, I thought, you know what, that's great. Let's apply for the licenses. And that's how I ended up in Green Mile. You know, I was part of a process, part of a group where we applied for licenses from the government. It's an arduous process. It's a long process. It's a complicated process. But bottom line is we obtained our licenses, and that's where I am today. I'm now a cannabis farmer.
Farmer John.
Well, my dad really thinks that's hilarious. He's 85 years old, and he said, "You know, John, I got off the farm so you kids wouldn't have to work on one, and here you are back on the farm." I said, "But Dad, tell me the truth. Didn't you like it?" He says, "Yeah, actually I did." I said, "Well, you know, it's in the blood, right? I'm enjoying it, but the kind of farming I'm doing is a little bit different from digging up potatoes. This is a little more fun, a lot more complicated, and frankly more lucrative."
Yeah, absolutely, and I've seen photos of the farm, and in my mind, it's more of a laboratory,
Right.
a living laboratory, than just a functioning farm. That
Right.
your model is not, let's produce as much cannabis as we can and sell it wholesale. It's, let's create the strains, and I know I'm oversimplifying it, but let's create the strains or the clones that are specifically designed to solve such and such a problem, but also that are going to thrive in Latin America in particular.
Exactly. No, we have outdoor grows. However, everything is within greenhouses, right? So we have climate control via our greenhouses. And we're also, because of the altitude that we're at, we're approximately 2,200 meters above sea level, which is almost 7,000 feet for the metrically challenged, right?
Mm-hmm.
What we find is that hey, listen, I have an American audience, right? They don't know what meters are. You know, and the advantages of being up that high are that, first of all, the plant doesn't get burned, because what happens is with cannabis, above certain temperatures, right, the plant will just stop producing resins, right? So if it gets too hot, it just doesn't produce anything. It's just trying to survive. So at that altitude, in a place like Colombia, where 60 degrees north of the equator, you're getting the full expression of the tropical sun. In fact, since you have less atmosphere, we've done estimates according to one of our consultants, who claims that we're getting about 2.2 times as much intensity of sun at 7,000 feet that we would get at sea level. So really plants are really getting the full expression, full spectrum of the sun, and it's very intense. On the other hand, the temperatures are only around the low to mid 70s in the daytime. At night, it goes down to the 50s. So it will sometimes get cool enough that it stresses the plant, which is what we want. With cannabis, when it's stressed, it starts to express resin. So what you want to do is you want to push the plant a little bit, not too much, because obviously don't want to kill it or stunt it. So it's a little bit, there's a balancing act there. And it also depends on the strains as well.
Sure.
We found that some strains just can't handle it. We found other strains really thrive. And we produced a CBD plant, for example, that produces, the last lab testing we did was 16%, but we think we can get that higher, we can get up to 20%, and just loves being up at that altitude, just loves it. Because if you take the same plant and we have test gardens at lower altitudes, right, in different areas, we can see, how the plants express themselves. And bottom line is that particular altitude, certain plants, like that CBD plant, we call it Charlotte's Angel, does really well. And what we find, though, is the plants that really like the high altitudes are the sativas, or actually what we prefer to call the narrow leaf plants, right? And those are the ones that produce high THC. And they seem to particularly thrive at that altitude and that climate. Lots of water, all year sun, a little bit of cloud. And even when there is cloud, because you're so high up, the acidic rays from the sun are still very powerful. James, I'll tell you, it's funny. Colombia is one of those places where you could go walk out where our farm is, spend an hour in the sun, feel perfectly good, walk inside, and you're practically rad because the sun is so darn intense. That's why hats are good and sunscreen. So we have people that visit. We say, wear your SPF 50, wear a hat, and wear glasses, and then they come out and they say, "Oh, no, this is great. I mean, I don't need any of that." I said, "Yeah, just wait." So you'll be as red as a stripe on my shirt.
I think it's fascinating. I remember, in Panama, your wife Sandra spoke at our event, and she spoke about the properties of heating, particularly in THC, that I never thought about. That actually it's not as simple as you smoke it or you take it by other means, but the actual heating process. So am I correct that we can say there's a parallel in the formation of the plants, that having the intense heat and sun is actually altering the way the plant develops, and the heat is strengthening certain factors that are valuable.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's a lot there to unpack in what you said, James, and so I'm just going to oversimplify, right? So what I'm going to say is that what Sandra was talking about was carboxylation, which essentially is what you're doing is you're taking the THCA in the plant, right? And you're converting it into a form that becomes psychoactive. And you can do that through smoking, through vaporizing. You can also do that through various chemical processes, like you heat the plant to a certain temperature, and then those cannabinoids start to express. If you go too high, they can be destroyed. So, and the actual process of doing, which I'll call distillation, but it's really not distillation. The actual process of transformation is actually quite complicated in the sense that you don't necessarily have to have like a PhD in molecular biology or molecular chemistry to do this, right? But it is definitely an art form, and just getting it right over time, learning how to do this type of process can get complicated, and different products will express. So, for example, if you let's talk about the plant, and I'm sorry if I'm going all over the place here, but
I'm going to redirect us in a couple of minutes, but let's please, we'll focus more on the business structure, but sure. Please carry on with that. Absolutely, John.
Just very quickly with the plant, even when you harvest the plant, makes a difference in what expression you have in THC or CBDs. So, for example, if you wait too long, your THC content will drop, but you might get more of a certain other cannabinoid, probably like what they call CBC or CBN, and I won't spell out those acronyms. People can look them up if they're interested. What does that mean? Well, it depends on what your purposes are, right? How you cure the plant, how you dry out the plant, that will also have effect on the content and the expression of the THC and the CBD. So being a grower, although it would be nice, everybody thinks it would be nice to reduce it to where an AI could tell you when to plant and when to pick. It doesn't work like that. These are living organisms. They're part of an ecosystem. They're part of they're with other plants, and they're affected by what's going on in their environment. In fact, the plants are even affected by the people around them. Our grower, for example, will not allow anybody who's in a negative mood to go in the greenhouse. Just won't. He says it affects the plants. And who am I to argue with a guy that knows what he's doing, right? And we all remember the stories of people talking their plants to make them grow better, right? Well, maybe there's something to that, right?
Just a couple days ago, my gardener was looking at a plant, and he was concerned that I wasn't talking to it, that I wasn't giving it positive vibes.
They respond. They really do.
Where I'd like to go now is I'm just thinking about how you structure a business around that, because it is very, what you're doing is very scientific, but it's also very agrarian. And right. Your end game is you want to make money on this. Yeah. So give us an idea of the structure of the team that is doing all this.
Okay, so I'm going to start with the master grower in our company, Jerry Jones, right? And he is working with a number of growers that he is training. Now, one of the advantages to Colombia for setting up a cannabis operation is you have a large pool of skilled labor. Mm-hmm. Colombia used to be number 2 or number 3 in the world in terms of illegal exports of cannabis to the rest of the world. So you have interesting situations. And I'm veering off a little bit, but there was a point to this. I had an agronomist, PhD agronomist, for example, that's been helping us. And he teaches at university. I asked him for his bio, and he shows me all this information. I said, well, this is all interesting, but you're just an academic, as far as I'm concerned, right? He goes, well, I spent 6 years in Cauca, which is the center of the illegal production for cannabis. And I said, oh, so you didn't want to put that on your resume. He goes, and he just smiles, right? This is what you're dealing with as an industry. It's a lot of wink, wink, nudge, nudge. But then again, you have a government that wants to take people out of this black market and I'd say put them into the green. That is to have them selling legally, right? So people that were doing this illegally before because they needed to make a living, frankly, right, are now being able to do this legally. So this is one of the great things. So what do we have? We have a master grower. We have agronomists. We have chemistry specialists. We have soil specialists. We have, of course, the actual farmhands that do the work. We have transportation. We have security. Security is really important. We have somebody that works for us without getting into specifics, has an extremely valuable security background in terms of being able to do background checks, in terms of setting up systems to monitor that our supply chain the integrity is maintained. One of the biggest issues that regulatory officials have, and when I make this statement, this is just my opinion, I presented on behalf of Zuber Lawler in Los Angeles in May of this year before a group of regulators on the subject of compliance, right? And what did they say to me? Because I'm asking, well, what keeps you guys worried? They're worried about illegal supply being mixed into the legal supply, right? And that's a great way to lose your license. So obviously, we're very careful about what we plant, accounting for each plant, tracking those plants, and then, we're keeping logs of it. And then, if we get rid of plants, we log that as well, right? Mm-hmm. And I think over time, but I mean, it's still, it's early stages, but I think over time, and I could see a scenario 5 years hence where if you're a typical cannabis producer, literally every plant is going to be tracked in the same way that you would have any kind of inventory. So on the agricultural side, there's going to be a lot more regulation in that area. It'll literally be like you have 100 plants, that's your quota. They'll be able to track whether those plants are yours or not, because there are DNA markers that are being developed right now that will be individual to a particular strain. So for example, if we go to sell flour to somebody, if they want to do a random testing, if it doesn't match that DNA profile, well, they may have some questions. Now, there is issues of genetic drift, meaning that plants will change over time, they will evolve. And also, since it's a male-female plant, things can change too. But having said that, that's kind of where they want to take it.
Right.
And
wow.
Do I like that regulation or not? Doesn't matter. That's just what I see. The other concerns, of course, too, they have is, the provenance of funds. Where does the money come from, right? So another part of our team was we have an excellent manager who has gone out of the way to make sure that we're on side with all the regulations, right? So we have an attorney that we work with very closely. That's necessary in this business. What does that look like? I had to go through something called SARLAF, which is basically a system, a program by which your background is run through, I don't know how many databases, I think they said 34 or something like that. I don't know the number, don't hold me to it, where they check to see whether or not, you have a non-criminal background.
Mm-hmm.
That's important to them, right? So this is an industry you're not going to sneak in. I mean, the amount of due diligence that goes into people right now is ridiculous. I mean, I sit on the board of Province. Province is totally separate from Green Mile. I'm just acting as a director for the company to help them with their scaling their business, because clearly I have a lot of public market experience.
Mm-hmm.
And bottom line is, Province did their background checks on me. Their underwriter did the background check on me. The exchange did their background check on me. And Health Canada did a background check. What's a background check? Fingerprints, biometrics, and conversations with your friends. In other words, I have a security clearance. I mean, that's literally what you have to go through. So
that's remarkable. There aren't many industries other than government that that have that.
The biggest risk I underestimated in this business, and I'll share this with everybody, is the regulatory. By that I mean I knew it was going to be highly regulated. I underestimated how much.
Sure.
And one of my friends pointed out to me, well, everything you're doing, John, that's what you'd be doing if you were handling opiates, right? And I said, well, I didn't realize I was in that business. But that's how they're treating it, which actually, on the face of it, to me, is absurd, James, for the very simple reason that last year, depending on who you believe, maybe 37,000 deaths were attributed to opiates overdoses, right? The comparable statistic for cannabis is 0.
Correct.
In the United States, something like 7,000 people have died from aspirins, 500 people have died from bee stings. So in other words, you have a greater risk of dying from a bee sting or a shark bite in the United States than from dying from consuming cannabis. But, this is the world we live in, and this is the cards that we've been dealt with, and we deal with the best we can.
Absolutely. And I think I appreciate that we're finally at a point in history that we can take cannabis seriously. Yes. I've never been a fan in my life. It's never interested me. And I live in a part of the world where CBD it has grown. It's all legal here, and it's quite CBD has grown quite popular in terms of the medicinal effects. And we're in a bit of a hype stage right now of people thinking that it will cure anything and everything. And as your wife Sandra has pointed out, it doesn't cure everything. But we're just at the beginning of discovering what it can actually be used for. So maybe that having it regulated and overly regulated right now, maybe that's going to help. I'm putting a positive spin on the regulation. Maybe that will help keep a focus, a proper focus, to be able to fully utilize this amazing plant.
Correct.
And I realize it's not just one plant.
Absolutely. And, and what you've said is absolutely correct. I mean, I talked to Sandra about this, Dr. Sandra Carrillo, MD. And
we'll be interviewing her in the future. I haven't asked her yet, but I have an end to ask her.
Oh no, she's good. She's extremely knowledgeable. As I mentioned to you, she just completed the Canopy Spectrum 5-day intensive. They invited her up to Ottawa. And I mean, they said at the end of the course, they said, you should be teaching this. So, and she has her professorship at the university at a university in Colombia called SES University, where she's teaching other doctors how to prescribe cannabinoids. So she really knows her stuff, right?
Yeah, she does. I think we better not go down that road, John, because I know that you're the biggest fan, her biggest fan.
Absolutely.
There are a few of us are not too far behind, but I want to stay focused on you.
No worries. So, I'm just a capitalist, right? My wife is the healer. What can I say? I do my best.
Hey, she healed you, and look what you got.
Yeah.
So here, let's redirect a little bit. I want to focus on making money. So our viewers and listeners are investors, and let's start at the general level. How can sophisticated investors, where is their money to be made at this point in time? That's question one. And then question two is, where do you see this going where people can make real money? I don't mean just buying stock in a publicly traded Canadian company at this point in time. I mean, where can we see asymmetrical opportunities?
Okay, so I'm going to make the following outrageous statement, and that is that 10 years hence, the whole cannabis/hemp industry, all of it will be larger than the pharmaceutical and alcohol industry combined, okay? And so we're talking a multi-trillion-dollar industry. And I'm going to say that there's 3 paths that you can take here: medical, adult use, and industrial. Okay. On the medical side, I believe that there will be major breakthroughs made, and this is my opinion, I'm not a medical doctor, there'll be major breakthroughs that will be made in isolating or developing compounds in combination with other compounds that will be very effective against certain neurological disorders. So let's take epilepsy. There's no question, this is proven, this is settled now, that CBDs, certain types of CBDs, will help refractory epileptics to manage their symptoms, full stop, end of story. So that already exists.
Yep.
It's also known that cannabis is very effective at reducing inflammation, right? So if you have even if you have a cut and wound, you put a little bit of a CBD on it, you'd be amazed how that will reduce it, okay? And where we're going to see that go is one of the biggest issues as the baby boomers age, of course, is Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's is huge. Also, other issues like Parkinson's. I believe that major breakthroughs will be made in those areas around cannabinoids. It's been shown, for example, that cannabinoids will break up the beta. I mean, and this is a study that I recently saw that will break up the beta amyloid plaques in your brain, which is they believe is responsible for the Alzheimer's. And they believe that THC may actually be effective in retarding the onset of Alzheimer's and may even stop it. So obviously there's a lot more research that needs to be done. And this is not a medical opinion. I'm only expressing my view as an investor journalist, right? So, nobody please take this as advice. Pain management, that's going to be absolutely huge. Many studies have shown that cannabis is very effective for reducing pain, right? What does that mean? We have an opiate crisis. People are dying from this, so they need a substitute. A lot of doctors in the United States don't want to prescribe opiates anymore because they don't have their license lifted and they don't want to be charged for obvious reasons, right? So what's happening is people are suffering. So what's the substitute? Well, it turns out that if you take THC and certain cannabinoid derivatives, and even if you combine them with a little bit of opiates, you can get very significant pain reduction. You can do it without the opiates, by the way. You can do it without. But there was a study that I saw where patients had reduced their opiate consumption by 90% by introducing CBDs. I don't recommend this to anybody, but by introducing this into their health regime. Do this under the care of a doctor. So what does that mean? Well, opiates are toxic. They're going to kill you. But if you're taking 20 grams a day versus 2 grams, that's a huge difference. That's a huge difference. So pain management is going to be huge. So on the biochemical side, biomedical side, there's going to be huge opportunities. Recreational side, right? I'm trying to imagine 10 years hence walking into a bar and instead of having to drink alcohol, which frankly is toxic, hurts your liver, hurts your brain, hurts your heart. Alcoholism is responsible for well over 40,000 deaths a year in the United States. You'll be able to drink cannabinoid derivatives that will actually be able to help you experience that euphoria associated with alcohol without all the negative side effects of alcohol.
Are we not already doing mixology with cannabinoids?
Yeah, there's that. People are doing that already. But I'm thinking, James, it's going to become a lot more refined. Right now, for example, okay, and I mean, here's my biases showing up. Province Brands produces a beer brewed solely from cannabis, right? How is that different from some of the other products? Right now, you're seeing what's called infused drinks, right? What does that mean? You take a beer, you de-alcoholize it, then you pour a cannabis infusion into it. Problem with that is it tastes lousy. It tastes from chlorophyll, right? Not a great experience, right? So what do? They disguise that with sugar. So you'll find a cannabis drink, for example, that'll have like 650, 700 calories. I won't name it, right? But it's out there. The beer that Province is brewing currently, we've tested it, has about 1/3 the calories of beer. So for someone like my wife who counts her calories, if she has a choice between drinking a cannabis-based beer that'll make her feel good but won't grossly intoxify her and won't have any negative effects, versus drinking a regular beer which is loaded with calories and frankly has other issues, that's what they're going to choose. And I'm not going to pretend to understand the faith of others like they're total doctored, but in parts of the world where alcohol is forbidden, I suspect cannabis drinks will be well received, right? It won't necessarily be the same prohibition. I could be wrong about that, but I think that that's going to be the case. So there's going to be a huge market. So on the recreational side, you're going to have your gummy bears. You're going to have, your chocolates and then cakes. I mean, you could put cannabis into anything. I mean, you're going to have food based around cannabis. You've already seen that already. So there's going to be this whole recreational side around branding. It's going to be big. So where's the money going to be made? I think on the recreational side, it's going to be off of branding and lifestyle marketing, creating positions, creating like the next Marlboros, for example. And Americans are geniuses at marketing, genius as sales and creating these kind of concepts. So I think the United States, if I was going to start out now, I wouldn't even look at the cultivation side. I'd be looking at how to create brands and how to create products for distribution and developing distribution networks. So I think that's going to be huge. Now, on the
Is that
third,
happening already in Canada, where it's nationally legal versus
yes,
here, where it's
that's
just
right.
this?
And by the way, just on a side note, what you're seeing in places like Canada now, I haven't got this quantified statistics yet, but seen it in places like Colorado, where cannabis is legal, alcohol sales have dropped. There are some places where I've been told informally the receipts are down 10, 15% in some bars. And we're just into the legalization now. I think 2-3 years from now, you might see that go down even more because frankly, they've done surveys of the millennials, right? And most of them prefer cannabis to alcohol. So we're going to see a huge shift there. So the recreational side is going to be, or the adult use side is going to be absolutely huge opportunity. Medical is going to be great too. Don't get me wrong. There's different sizes for the markets. I think on the medical side, if you get the, the right patents and you have you're self-protected, you can do extremely well. But I think just in gross dollars, that the recreational or the adult use will be larger.
And then is that all THC side?
Yeah, THC side, but also just CBD side. So let's say, for example, you ingest pure CBDs. No, you will not get high, so to speak, but you will have a sense of wellness. So as my wife would say, CBD is psychoactive, but it's not psychotropic, right? It doesn't give you a sense zone, but it does affect your receptors, right? It does act on them. And so what does that actually look like? You just feel good. You don't have any aches and pains. You just feel normal. You feel stabilized. Because it turns out that we have something called the endocannabinoid system. That's something that she should talk about. But bottom line is, if your endocannabinoid system is properly modulated, which for a lot of people it hasn't, that instead of feeling that underlying stress or that underlying anxiety, just consuming a little bit of CBD kind of just takes away that. Doesn't mean your life has changed. It just means you don't feel as bad about it. So, where we're seeing huge growth, by the way, is in the over 60 market. I mean, there's a lot of people in so-called aged nursing homes. I hate that term, but for people, the retirement communities where they're under assisted care, who are taking cannabinoids to help them with their pains. They're getting out of bed, their minds are clear, they just feel better. And that's because they've been having a deficiency of cannabinoids. Now, on the industrial side, the third leg of this, okay?
Yeah.
I'm going to use an example. We'll call it hempcrete. Turns out if you mix hemp, the actual industrial hemp, which is part of the cannabis family, but it's a different plant, and you combine that with other materials, you can create blocks, building blocks, that are harder than concrete, lighter than concrete, right? Which are also much more environmentally friendly and much more resistant to insects, for example, and resistant to the other things. So you could take those hemp blocks, leave them out, literally build a house for 50 years in the middle of the jungle, and that house will be fine. Now, people find that to be an odd statement. But if we remember, if you think of the Titanic and you think of those ropes that they used for the Titanic, that was made from hemp. The United States Constitution was written on hemp. I remember visiting my family in Slovenia at a church where they had a rope that was over 300 years old, at least, made of hemp. Still works, still in good shape, and by the way, it's highly fire resistant as well. So on the buildings, and by the way, a lot of people don't know this, but Henry Ford in the 1930s made a car out of hemp. It was stronger than steel. So you're going to see some really interesting changes on the material science side. A lot of the plastics that you see around you right now, you can get rid of them. There's a substitute hemp for that, right? So you can have hemp cups and hemp bags, right? And if you don't need them, well, you could burn them. And does that cause a little bit of pollution? Yes, it does. But it's a heck of a lot better than burning plastics, right? So that sector alone is going to be absolutely magnificent. Plus, of course, with hemp, it's a great grain. You can eat it. It's a very healthy grain. Has a lot of good nutrients in it. So that's why I say when you take all those sectors together, combine it, that's going to be bigger than alcohol and pharmaceuticals. So actually, I think I'm being conservative. If you want to know the truth.
I think you've just hit on multiple sectors where it's going to be useful. I'm glad you didn't start with hemp, because we've always had people around us that are favorable towards hemp, and yes, it has amazing characteristics, but that's useful and marketable, but it's something has always held that back. The hemp industry. It's usually the slightly off person that's selling their hemp clothing that talks about it. But you've put it into the context of industry and how useful it is. And thank you in particular for providing the background of all of these uses of hemp going back hundreds of years. I think that's absolutely fascinating. And it is remarkable. I think we're going to come to a close soon, but I want to ask one more question, and that is, where else in the world are we seeing cannabis industry developing on the scale that it's developing in Latin America and North America?
Well, Africa looks interesting, and then I'll speak a little bit to Asia, although I know less about Asia. On the African side, right, there are a number of countries in Africa that have either legalized for medicinal or even for recreational use. Don't hold me this, but I believe South Africa has done that, right? And I know that Lesotho, which is a kingdom located within South Africa, has gone legal. And what does that mean? Well, they have good growing conditions for creating industrial hemp, and they have good growing conditions for a lot of other types of plants too, the high THC and low THC plants. So I think those countries have the potential. The big concern I have in Africa is, can you get the skilled labor to help you do the full value chain? What do I mean by that? It's one thing to get, manual employees, farm hands, even to get growers and so forth. It's another thing to get the scientists, the doctors, the engineers, to get the chemists. And that's something that they're going to have to develop, I believe. Sure, they could bring in experts from the outside, right? But that's going to be costly. And frankly, some people might be happy to work in Africa a couple of years. There's nothing wrong. I visit Africa. I love the place, right? Went on safari for 6 weeks. But I'm just saying it's a different place.
Correct.
You have to be willing to pull up your family if you have a family to go there. And there's a lot of people that just won't do that. So we'll see how that plays itself out. Europe, there's a number of countries that are going to be doing cultivation. I think they're going to have some success, but I think their costs are going to be too high. Okay, just like in North America. People ask me, why are you growing in Colombia, right? And it's very simple. I can buy banana. I can get banana plants. I can go to Canada. I can open a warehouse. I could put lights in. I can plant those bananas. I can grow the plants, and I can harvest bananas in Canada. But it's cheaper in Colombia. Same way cannabis production is just like that, right? You can produce in indoor warehouses in Canada, and you're going to be paying anywhere from $2.50 to $3 a gram. I saw some reports recently it costs. Or you can produce cannabis in a place like Colombia, where I can produce it for 20 cents a gram. That's just outdoor grow, different environment, different conditions. That's just what it is, right? But that doesn't mean that there's an opportunity, in other areas. There's huge opportunities, others that I've mentioned, on the marketing, sales, on the derivatives, on creating products. I mean, massive, and having to train people. I mean, I see scenarios. I know of a scenario, for fact, in Mexico, where there's some research that is being done, and where they're taking the cannabis plants and they're bringing it up to the United States and having it fully extracted, all the derivatives, and then shipping it back to Mexico. Why? Because they can't do it there, right? So you're going to need those people.
Right.
South America, I think, is going to be a cannabis powerhouse. Colombia in particular, call me biased, but there's other countries like Peru that are going to do really well. I think that, Uruguay is legal, and I think they have some opportunities there. But Chile will be interesting as well. There'll be countries in Central America. Mexico, I was recently at a conference. I was invited by the Institute of the Americas in San Diego in this past month, in August, because we're now in September.
Yeah,
to present on cannabis and the industry from Colombia. Even though they were focused on Mexico, they wanted to hear from somebody in Colombia, so they invited me out, right? And I listened to what they're doing. And to me, the bottom line is Mexico is going to have some really interesting opportunities, but it might be 1 or 2 years away. So that's why I'm saying things like that, that I'm saying Colombia, because right now Colombia, ironically, of all the countries in South America, I think is the most advanced, even though there's definitely some issues there. South America is going to be great for producing it because they got the right climatic conditions and the right labor and everything like that. Asia, wow, I mean, God, there's going to be so many opportunities there. I mean, the Chinese are already producing hemp, so there's that. Thailand, I don't know enough about it. I plan to go visit next year. We were invited, Sandra and I, to both to speak and present, right? So we're going to go check it out. Sandra is invited to Osaka to go speak in Tokyo on medical cannabinoids. So we'll find out what's going on in Japan. Japan is very strictly regulated right now, but they're opening the door. So who can say? But right now, I think the low-hanging fruit, from my perspective, is North America, parts of South America, and parts of Europe. That's where I'd say the low-hanging fruit.
Sure.
Africa will definitely come on stream, but it's going to be a while.
Yeah. Well, we will stay tuned. Our listeners and viewers know that you're part of the Obris family, and so I'm expecting to have you.
Great family, love it. I really do.
Return to both you and Sandra to return to speaking at future events, and I love that you're covering two things that are important to me and to a lot of us, and that is, one is from the investor perspective, but then likewise, longevity and living well, living long is a significant focus for us, and that's really what Sandra, a lot of what she does facilitates for people.
Correct. Now, cannabis, in particular CBDs, will be a major part of any regenerative medicine program, any wellness program, any anti-aging program. Of that, I have no doubt.
Yeah.
It's just amazing. If you have skin conditions, for example, and you apply CBDs on it, it'll just clear up. And just things like arthritis. I have arthrosis in my right toe from too many martial art kicks, right? And it's painful. But if I take a salve made of CBD and I put it on that joint, to literally watch it shrink and the pain to go away and to be able to walk, it's like, wow, it's amazing. It's going to be huge. So.
Wow.
It already is, and here's the other thing too. Just one quick thing, James, for the benefit of everybody here. It's worth remembering that this market is a little different from other markets. When I was in technology, one of the big questions were, will our services be receptive to the market? Does the market really want what we have? And like something like the iPad was a bit of a gamble for people that want to think creatively, like what Apple did, right? And some of the things that we launched, we didn't know whether people wanted it, or whether it was online chats or dating applications, and so forth. You think it's there, you don't know. But cannabis, the demand is there. So it's not a question, does the market exist? Oh, it exists. The question is, can you satisfy that market?
Correct.
Someone like Sandra, who's a medical doctor who can prescribe controlled doses to patients, they're willing to try cannabis under those circumstances. But I don't blame them if they don't want to buy from somebody that they don't know on the street who says, yeah, hey, this is a good product. That's where I see it really going.
We've moved to a very different place.
Correct.
In that the model has changed dramatically. Exactly. I watch that. I live in a state in the U.S. where we've seen that dramatic shift, and it was a quick shift too. Mm-hmm. From people having to hide to people actually being able to have easy access, and particularly from a medicinal standpoint, being able to have.
Well, it's a human right in my perspective. I mean, I'm looking at these poor kids in Panama that are suffering, for example, from epilepsy, and they listen to the equivalent of the FDA say, oh yeah, take your Pedialex. It's only $38,000 a year. Yeah, right. Whereas these cannabis derivatives can, and by the way, Pedialex is a cannabis derivative, right? But there should be ways to provide people with medicine a lot more cheap. Sandra, for example, I'm wrapping this up. She has a patient, a young girl, 10 years old, had 400 seizures a day, couldn't go to school. Mother had to stay with her all the time. Kid is now in class. Symptoms are totally under control. Mother and family has a normal life. The girl has friends. I mean, this is what we need. We need this medicine to help people. So this isn't just like, oh, I want to have another way to alter my consciousness. There is that. There's nothing wrong with that. But I think on the medical side, how it's going to change the world, we've just begun. We haven't even began to really see how this is going to manifest. But we're going to be a lot different, that's for sure. Medicine is going to change a lot.
Absolutely. And you've given us a great glimpse into this. And I knew that asking you to do a podcast with me, that we could introduce others to what I and a lot of our members have experienced through you and Sandra, in terms of where we're at and where we're going with this. Right. So thank you very much for this time. And as I said earlier, we'll be checking back. So as things go forward for you, we know that Green Mile it will be moving forward, and you will be continuing on with your various efforts as well. So, John, thank you very much.
We're executing on our plan. It's doing well.
Yeah. All right.